Have you ever considered that the most terrifying stories aren't those from distant haunted mansions, but the ones whispered in the dark corners of your own hometown? What if the cautionary tales we tell ourselves aren't just fables, but chilling echoes of a truth that refuses to stay buried? This is the chilling truth behind The Hook. In the quiet, tree-lined suburbs that sprawl outwards from any major city, there exist pockets of shadow, places where teenage secrets and youthful indiscretions play out under the cover of night. These are the lovers' lanes, secluded stretches of road, often winding through dense woods, where parked cars become temporary havens for whispered confessions and tentative romance. But for decades, in countless towns across America, these innocent havens have been tainted by a chilling legend, a cautionary tale passed from older siblings to nervous teenagers. The story of The Hook. It's a classic familiar to almost everyone, yet its simplicity hides a far more sinister reality. The legend usually begins the same way. A young couple, perhaps on their first date, or stealing a late-night kiss, parked on a secluded lover's lane. The radio crackles with a news bulletin. Dangerous, escaped mental patient, a man with a hook for a hand, is on the loose in the area. The girl, terrified, begs to leave. The boy, eager to impress, dismisses her fears. They argue, the tension building, until finally he relents. He speeds away from the lane, pulling into her driveway, annoyed. As he goes to open her door, he glances back at the car, and there, hanging from the door handle, is a bloody, metallic hook. This familiar tale, however, masks a deeper, more disturbing pattern that began not in an asylum, but in the forgotten woods bordering the small, seemingly unremarkable town of Havenwood. It was the early 1970s, a time of innocence and burgeoning freedom. The first incident, officially deemed a tragic accident, occurred on a stretch of old logging road just outside town, a popular spot for local teenagers. A young couple, Mark and Susan, were found in their car unresponsive. The official report cited carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty exhaust, but the local sheriff, Old Ben Carter, a man who had seen too much in his quiet life, found something unsettling. Drag marks in the mud leading away from the car, and a single deep gouge on the passenger side door, as if something sharp and heavy had been dragged across it. He kept it to himself. As the years passed, similar accidents began to crop up, always in secluded spots, always involving young couples, and always with subtle, unexplainable details. A snapped branch where nothing should be, a faint, metallic smell in the air that wasn't gasoline, and a gnawing sense of unease reported by those who stumbled upon the scenes. The town dismissed them as unfortunate coincidences, the dangers of youth and recklessness. But Sheriff Carter knew better. He started noticing the pattern of the marks on the cars, the consistent depth and trajectory of the gouges. They weren't random, they were deliberate, and they looked exactly like something left by a large, sharpened hook. The legend of the hook began to spread, fueled by local whispers and distorted facts, a convenient explanation for a terror no one wanted to truly acknowledge. But the entity behind the legend was far more sinister than a simple escaped maniac. It wasn't just targeting reckless teenagers, it was learning. The attacks grew more aggressive, the evidence left behind more unsettling. There were reports of car doors being violently ripped open from the outside, of terrified screams abruptly cut short. One night, a survivor, a girl named Sarah, stumbled out of the woods, hysterical, her hair matted with blood, her skin covered in scratches. She spoke of a shadowy figure impossibly fast appearing from the darkness. It wasn't a man, she insisted, but a tearing shadow, moving with an unnatural grace, its silhouette ending in a terrifying, glinting curve. Before she could describe more, she succumbed to shock and injuries, slipping into a coma from which she never awoke. Sheriff Carter, standing over her hospital bed, saw the same gouge marks on the car door her date had been driving. He knew then it wasn't just a legend, it was a predator, adapting, growing bolder, and it wasn't human. The Haven Wood incidents eventually faded from public memory, subsumed by other more conventional crimes. Sheriff Carter retired, carrying his grim knowledge with him, his attempts to warn others dismissed as the ramblings of an old man. But the legend of the hook continued to thrive, migrating from town to town, its core elements shifting and adapting, yet always retaining that chilling central image. The weapon, the lurking threat in the dark. It became a universal fear, a primal warning to teenagers everywhere to be mindful of the isolated places, of the shadows that cling to the edges of civilization. So, the next time you hear that familiar tale, that chilling anecdote about the hook on the car door, consider this. What if the story isn't just a story? What if it's a memory passed down and distorted of something real? Something that still haunts those secluded lanes, not a madman, but an ancient, formless hunger that simply adopted the most convenient, most terrifying guise? Because sometimes the urban legends aren't just warnings, they are a continuation. And somewhere out there on a dark, forgotten road, a cold wind still whispers through the trees, and something unseen still drags its metallic shadow across the pavement, waiting for the unwary to park a little too close to the edge of the woods. Years turned into decades, and the world changed. Lovers' lanes gave way to online dating and fleeting connections, but the primal fear of the isolated, dark remained. The legend of the hook, though less frequently whispered around campfires, found new life on the internet, morphing into creepypastas and viral threads. Yet it was always just a story, a frightening tale to share, or so everyone believed. But the entity, the tearing shadow with the glinting curve, wasn't bound by human understanding of time or technology. It had simply adapted. It understood patterns, understood fear, and understood the new ways humans sought connection and vulnerability. The old logging roads and secluded lanes of Haven Wood eventually became overgrown, forgotten by all but the most dedicated adventurers. However, the presence didn't vanish. It simply shifted its hunting grounds, not to new physical locations, but to the very spaces where human connection was now forged. The first subtle signs appeared as digital anomalies, glitches in video calls between lovers, a sudden distortion that momentarily twisted a familiar face into a monstrous parody, the fleeting appearance of a shadowy silhouette in the background of a webcam feed. Then came the messages, random, unsettling texts sent to couples at odd hours, containing only a single nonsensical phrase or a chillingly specific detail about their private conversations. When questioned, neither party remembered sending them. The most disturbing incidents involved smart home devices. Suddenly, lights would flicker, doors would unlock, and from the static of a smart speaker, a low, guttural growl would emanate, followed by a faint, metallic scrape. These weren't just hacks. The patterns were too precise, too personal, mirroring the invasive, taunting nature of the original attacks. One chilling case involved a young couple, Sarah and Tom, who were video chatting late one night. Tom, playfully, joked about the hook legend, daring Sarah to close her eyes for a count of 10. She giggled, obliging him. When she opened her eyes, Tom's screen had frozen. Behind his still image, in the darkened corner of his room, a shadowy form was unmistakably visible. It wasn't human. Its silhouette tapered into a sharp, glinting curve. Then, a sharp, tearing sound erupted from Tom's microphone, followed by a scream that was abruptly cut short. Sarah's screen went black. When authorities investigated, Tom's apartment showed no signs of forced entry, no struggle. Everything was meticulously in place. But Tom was gone. The only anomaly? A single deep gouge mark carved into the screen of his laptop, as if something sharp and heavy had been dragged across it. The disappearance of Tom and similar perplexing cases in the years that followed were officially deemed unexplainable, perhaps the result of sudden, private circumstances. But those who followed the online threads, who saw the pattern, knew otherwise. The hook had found a new lover's lane, the vast, interconnected web of digital intimacy. It no longer needed secluded roads or physical presence. It could reach out through screens, through wires, through the very airwaves, drawn by the vulnerability of shared moments and whispered affections. It had learned to hunt in the digital shadows, leaving behind its chilling signature not on car doors, but on the screens that connect us. The digital realm, boundless and ever-expanding, became the hook's perfect hunting ground. Its reach was no longer limited by geographic constraints. Every shared photo, every whispered text, every video call became a potential portal, an open invitation for the entity to extend its malevolent influence. The online communities dedicated to true crime and urban legends, once a safe space for sharing frightening stories, now found themselves subtly, terrifyingly infiltrated. Theories about glitches and hacks gave way to uneasy speculation about a new digital haunting. The ultimate twist in this evolving horror came not through a violent disappearance, but through a chilling, existential dread that began to seep into the collective consciousness of those who obsessed over the hook. Individuals who spent too much time researching the old Havenwood incidents or analyzing the digital anomalies started reporting a profound sense of loneliness. Not just emotional solitude, but a visceral, bone-deep feeling of being utterly, irrevocably isolated, even when surrounded by loved ones. They described feeling disconnected, as if a thin, invisible barrier had formed between them and the rest of humanity. Conversations felt hollow. Laughter seemed alien, and the warmth of human touch became a distant memory. This psychological torment manifested in increasingly disturbing ways. Some individuals began to experience a bizarre phenomenon where their own reflections would subtly shift in mirrors or on screens, their eyes seeming to hold an unsettling emptiness. Others reported waking up to find meticulously arranged objects in their homes, items they swore they had left elsewhere, as if an unseen hand was tidying their lives, preparing for something. The most unsettling reports spoke of an internal scrape, a phantom sensation on their own skin, as if a hook was being dragged across their very being, not physically, but psychically, tearing away layers of their humanity. And then, the final, terrifying symptom, they would find themselves drawn inexplicably to a blank screen, a dark mirror, or a quiet, isolated corner of their home. They would sit, sometimes for hours, staring into the void, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on their lips, mirroring the unnerving grin of the stick figure face from Evelyn Reed's laptop. The victims of this new terror weren't found dead or even missing in the traditional sense. They were still there, physically present, but something fundamental had been removed. Their warmth, their spark, their very essence seemed to have been siphoned away, leaving behind hollowed-out shells, perpetually lost in a profound internal solitude. They were still online, still technically interacting, but their digital presence felt cold, devoid of genuine emotion. It was as if the hook had learned that the ultimate torment wasn't to take a life, but to steal the connection that made life worth living. It had found a way to create an infinite lover's lane of the mind, where its victims, while technically present, were forever alone, isolated in a digital void of their own making. So, be careful what legends you chase, what digital shadows you explore. For the hook, the ancient hunger from the forgotten woods has evolved. It no longer needs to physically hang a reminder on your car door. It has found a way to reach into the very core of your being, to detach you from everything you hold dear, leaving you connected yet utterly alone. And if you ever feel that inexplicable chill, that profound sense of isolation, or catch a fleeting, empty smile in your own reflection, you'll know that the hook has found you, and it has already begun to scrape away the parts of you that connect you to the world, leaving you in an eternal, silent lover's lane, just for it. The most unsettling revelation, however, wasn't found in a dusty archive or a fragmented digital record, but in the most mundane of places, the quiet, almost imperceptible shifts in everyday reality. For those who had been consumed by the hook, who had felt its unseen touch on their very souls, a final chilling transformation occurred. Their digital footprint, once vibrant and active, would slowly, subtly begin to erase itself, not in a sudden, dramatic deletion, but a gradual fading, like an old photograph left in the sun. Old posts would vanish, profiles would become inactive, and messages would mysteriously disappear from conversations, leaving only fragmented, baffling exchanges. They were still there, technically, within the vast, interconnected network, but their digital self, their online presence, was being meticulously unmade. And then, the physical world began to mirror this digital erasure. Friends and family, even those closest to the affected individuals, would experience fleeting moments of confusion, a sudden blankness when trying to recall specific memories involving them. A shared laugh would feel oddly misplaced. A vivid conversation would seem to have no beginning. Personal items belonging to the victims, photos, gifts, cherished mementos, would gradually lose their significance, becoming just objects. Their faces in old group photos would subtly blur. Their voices in recordings would become a touch fainter, their names just a little harder to recall. The hook wasn't just isolating its victims, it was systematically unmaking their very existence. From the fabric of reality, one connection, one memory, one detail at a time. It was the ultimate, insidious triumph, to not just take a life, but to consume the legacy of a life, leaving behind only an empty space where a person once was, a space slowly forgotten by all. The Havenwood legend spoke of a shadow that could tear and consume. The digital age allowed it to evolve, to tear not just flesh, but the bonds of human connection. Now, it had mastered the final act, the quiet, chilling deletion of memory itself. It was the ultimate lover's lane, a void of absolute solitude, where the victim was not merely isolated, but utterly erased, their existence becoming a phantom whisper on the wind, a story that no one could quite remember how it began, or why they felt a sudden, inexplicable chill. So the next time you feel a fleeting sense of forgetting, a momentary blankness where a memory should be, or glimpse a shadow that isn't quite, right at the corner of your digital eye, remember the hook. Remember the ancient hunger that evolved, that learned to tear away not just flesh, but connection, and finally, memory itself. Because in the vast, interconnected network of our lives, the ultimate predator may not be the one who screams in the dark, but the one who quietly, meticulously erases you from existence until there's nothing left but a faint, unidentifiable scrape on the fabric of time. And then it moves on, leaving behind a silence so profound, it's as if you were never here at all.